Welcome to Books and More Audio, a channel where powerful ideas meet calm storytelling. Here, we explore the world's most thought-provoking books and uncover the lessons that shape how we live, think, and grow. In today's episode, we dive into Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lembke, a groundbreaking exploration of how modern life, filled with endless pleasure and distraction, has rewired our brains. This book reveals why our constant search for comfort leaves us feeling empty, and how facing discomfort can restore balance, freedom, and true happiness in a dopamine-driven world. Introduction: The endless pursuit of pleasure. When I first met Jacob, I saw a man who appeared gentle, intelligent, and perfectly composed. But beneath his calm surface was a storm that had been raging for decades. As a child, Jacob stumbled upon pleasure by accident, a discovery so powerful that it reshaped the way his brain worked. Raised in a strict religious family, he was taught that desire was sinful, that pleasure was something to be resisted. Yet the more he tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. His life turned into a pendulum, swinging between indulgence and guilt, between the temporary relief of pleasure and the heavy weight of shame. As an adult, Jacob's brilliance became his downfall. Using his skills as an engineer, he created what he once called his machine of pleasure, a simple motorized device that could keep him on the edge of orgasm for hours. What fascinated me wasn't the machine itself, but the way his mind had learned to chase stimulation endlessly, unable to rest. Years later, when the internet arrived, it gave him a new kind of access: infinite novelty, infinite temptation, and infinite escape. What had once been a secret compulsion grew into an uncontrollable spiral. He spent his nights scrolling, watching, clicking, feeding a hunger that could never be satisfied. Jacob's story stayed with me because it wasn't just his, it was ours. In today's world, we are surrounded by the same forces that trapped him: the instant gratification of screens, social media, shopping, food, success. Our brains, wired for scarcity, now live in a world of overwhelming abundance. And in that abundance, pleasure has lost its meaning. We chase comfort, we avoid discomfort, and we confuse stimulation with happiness. But the truth is simple: the more we chase pleasure, the more pain follows. Each spike of dopamine demands an equal and opposite drop. The brain seeks balance, yet we keep breaking it. When I began writing Dopamine Nation, I wasn't just studying addiction, I was observing a cultural transformation. I saw patients from every walk of life: executives addicted to work, teenagers glued to their phones, parents lost in online worlds. None of them looked like the stereotypical addict, yet all were caught in the same cycle, seeking relief, finding emptiness. What united them wasn't weakness, but humanity. The desire to escape pain is universal, but by constantly soothing ourselves, we have forgotten how to endure. Jacob taught me something profound. Healing doesn't come from eliminating pleasure, but from restoring balance. To live well, we must relearn how to tolerate discomfort, to face pain, to sit in silence, to feel boredom, because these states are not enemies. They are the doorway back to joy. Only when we stop running from pain can we rediscover the quiet, steady happiness that has nothing to do with dopamine and everything to being fully alive. Chapter 1: Our Machines of Pleasure. When I think of the modern world, I often picture Jacob's story, not because it's extreme, but because it's familiar. He was an intelligent man, thoughtful and kind, yet trapped by his own brain's craving for pleasure. From an early age, Jacob discovered the power of dopamine, the invisible current that pushes us toward reward and escape from pain. Like many of us, he didn't know that every time he indulged, he was quietly training his brain to want more. As he grew older, his curiosity met his compulsion. With an engineer's precision, Jacob built what he called his pleasure machine, a mechanical device that could keep him in a near-constant state of stimulation. What began as an experiment became an obsession. He could spend hours lost in that artificial loop of excitement and release, until pleasure itself became pain. The machine was not the problem, it was only a mirror. It showed how easily the human brain, given the chance, will chase dopamine until exhaustion. Years later, when the internet emerged, Jacob's private struggle became everyone's story. What once required secrecy and effort could now be summoned with a tap or a click. Pornography, gambling, social media, endless sources of pleasure within arm's reach. I began to realize that Jacob's machine was no longer a physical device. It had evolved into every smartphone, every screen, every algorithm built to keep us scrolling, watching, consuming. We had all built our own pleasure machines, and we were all becoming their servants. In my years as a psychiatrist, I've seen countless versions of Jacob. A teenager who cannot sleep without his phone. A mother who hides in the bathroom to scroll through social media. A businessman who works obsessively, addicted not to success itself, but to the thrill of chasing it. Each one believes their story is unique, yet they all share the same neurological truth. When the brain is bombarded with dopamine, it adapts by producing less of it. The more we seek pleasure, the less we can feel it. That is the paradox of modern life, a world overflowing with comfort but starved of joy. We are surrounded by stimulation, yet losing our ability to be satisfied. The same mechanisms that once helped our ancestors survive scarcity now betray us in abundance. Pleasure, once a guide toward survival, has become a trap. In this first chapter, I wanted to show that addiction isn't about weakness or moral failure. It's about biology, about how our brains are wired to repeat what feels good, even when it destroys us. Jacob's story is not an exception, it's a warning. We are all one click, one craving, one small indulgence away from creating our own version of his machine. And until we understand the balance between pleasure and pain, we will keep feeding the cycle, mistaking stimulation for happiness and dopamine for love. Chapter 2. Running from Pain. For most of my career, I believed my job as a psychiatrist was to help people escape pain. But over time, I came to see that pain itself wasn't the problem. Our desperate attempt to avoid it was. In today's world, where pleasure is available on demand, we've forgotten how to sit with discomfort. Every inconvenience, every flicker of sadness or boredom sends us running for relief. A drink, a scroll, a pill, a distraction. Yet the more we chase comfort, the more fragile we become. The human brain operates on a delicate balance between pleasure and pain, like two sides of a scale. Each time we seek a pleasurable experience, the scale tips toward pleasure. But the brain, seeking equilibrium, automatically pushes back, tilting us toward pain. This mechanism once helped us survive scarcity, motivating us to keep seeking food, shelter, or warmth. But in an age of abundance, it's become our undoing. Constant access to dopamine from social media, sugar, sex, shopping keeps the scale tipped toward pleasure so long that the brain compensates by dulling our sensitivity. Soon, ordinary joys no longer satisfy, and even mild discomfort feels unbearable. I think of the many patients I've treated who arrived in my office exhausted, anxious, and hollowed out. A man who began using painkillers after surgery but couldn't stop even after the pain was gone. A woman who checked her phone every few minutes, terrified of missing a message. A student who played video games through the night, skipping classes, unable to face real life. None of them were weak or broken. They were simply human, doing what our brains are wired to do: seek relief from pain. But this endless escape comes at a cost. When we remove all forms of discomfort, we also lose our capacity for pleasure. The moments of happiness that once felt bright now fade quickly, and we find ourselves chasing more stimulation to fill the void. It's a trap, one built not from moral failure, but from biology. The harder we run from pain, the more it pursues us. Healing, I've learned, begins not with more pleasure, but with tolerance for pain. When my patients commit to abstaining from their source of dopamine, whether for days or weeks, their brains begin to reset. At first, they feel restless, irritable, even despairing, but gradually a quiet balance returns. They begin to find joy in small things again: a meal, a conversation, a sunrise. In the end, this chapter isn't about suffering for its own sake. It's about reclaiming the strength to face reality as it is: imperfect, unpredictable, sometimes painful. Because only when we stop running from pain can we experience the full, steady beauty of being alive. Chapter 3: The Balance Between Pleasure and Pain. Every time I sit across from a patient struggling with addiction, I think about the delicate balance that exists inside the human brain. Pleasure and pain are not opposites. They are partners dancing on the same stage. When one rises, the other inevitably follows. The brain, in its wisdom, is always seeking equilibrium. Each time we experience pleasure, whether through a drink, a scroll, or a moment of praise, dopamine surges and the scale tips. But soon after, the brain compensates by pushing us toward pain to restore balance. That's why, after indulgence, we often feel empty, restless, or low. This system once protected us. In an age of scarcity, it ensured we kept searching for food, safety, and connection. But in the modern world, a world overflowing with stimulation, this balance has turned against us. We are no longer fighting for survival. We are drowning in abundance. Every ping, every like, every bite of sugar delivers a tiny hit of dopamine. Yet with each hit, the brain adjusts, reducing its baseline pleasure level. What once felt good now feels neutral, and what was once neutral now feels unbearable. I remember Tony, a man in his 30s who came to me after years of compulsive pornography use. He didn't understand why he could no longer feel aroused by real intimacy, why ordinary life felt flat. His brain had been flooded with dopamine for so long that it had down-regulated its own reward system. When he stopped watching, he suffered anxiety, irritability, even despair. But over time, something extraordinary happened. After weeks of abstinence, his mood lifted. He noticed the color of the sky again, the laughter of friends, the quiet joy of being alive. His brain had begun to heal, to reset the scale. This taught me something fundamental. We cannot chase pleasure without inviting pain. The two are bound together by biology. If we continue to reach for easy joy, the fast dopamine of screens and comfort, we dull our capacity to feel the slower, deeper pleasures that give life meaning. Conversely, when we accept small doses of pain, like exercise, fasting, or silence, the brain responds with balance. After discomfort comes genuine satisfaction, the kind that lingers. In this chapter, I wanted to show that the goal is not to eliminate pleasure, but to restore proportion. To understand that happiness isn't constant euphoria, but a steady rhythm between joy and struggle. When we respect this balance, we are no longer ruled by our cravings. Instead, we learn to live within the natural flow of the human experience, one where pain sharpens pleasure, and pleasure reminds us that life, in all its imperfection, is still worth feeling fully. Chapter 4: Dopamine Fasting. For years, I watched people try to escape their cravings with more control, more rules, more effort, more guilt. But the brain doesn't heal through force, it heals through stillness. That realization led me to the concept of dopamine fasting, a deliberate pause from the endless stimulation that dominates our modern lives. This isn't about punishment or deprivation. It's about giving the brain space to reset, to return to its natural rhythm of pleasure and pain. In our world, silence has become unbearable. The moment we feel boredom, sadness, or loneliness, we reach for something: our phones, snacks, music, anything to fill the void. But each small escape keeps our brains in a constant state of agitation. Dopamine fasting asks us to do the opposite, to stop running and simply sit with the discomfort. When patients commit to a period without their source of stimulation, whether it's gaming, social media, alcohol, or pornography, their first reaction is panic. They fear emptiness. Yet that emptiness is exactly where healing begins. The first few days of abstinence are always the hardest. The brain, deprived of its usual rewards, reacts like a child denied its favorite toy, restless, angry, desperate. But slowly, something shifts. Sleep returns, thoughts become clearer. Small pleasures, a walk, a meal, a real conversation, start to feel meaningful again. As dopamine receptors recover, the brain's balance restores itself. What once required constant stimulation now feels alive in quiet. I, too, experienced this in my own life. There was a time when I turned to novels to escape reality. I told myself it was harmless, even healthy, but soon realized I was using stories to avoid my own feelings, so I stopped. The first nights felt unbearable. The silence in my head was deafening, but gradually the noise settled. I began to notice my surroundings, to listen to my family, to feel present. It wasn't just my mind that changed, my life did. Dopamine fasting is not about rejecting pleasure, it's about reclaiming control. In a world that constantly whispers more, it teaches us the value of enough. It reminds us that discomfort isn't the enemy, it's the path back to balance. When we stop numbing ourselves, we rediscover the beauty in simplicity, in boredom, in patience, in real connection. By turning down the volume of stimulation, we give our brains the chance to hear life again. The goal is not a permanent withdrawal from joy, but a return to authentic joy, the kind that doesn't depend on a screen, a substance, or a surge of dopamine. It's the joy of being alive in this very moment, unfiltered, unescapable, and utterly human. Chapter 5. Space, Time, and Meaning. After years of studying addiction, I came to understand that recovery isn't just about removing the source of pleasure, it's about rebuilding the structure of a meaningful life. When people stop using dopamine-inducing substances or behaviors, they are left with something they've long avoided: silence, time, and space. At first, these feel unbearable, but slowly they become the very foundation of healing. Our environment profoundly shapes our minds. Many of my patients realize that their homes, routines, and even relationships were designed around their addictions. One man recovering from alcoholism cleared his kitchen of every bottle and replaced them with ingredients to cook for his family. Another woman addicted to social media deleted every app from her phone and replaced her nightly scrolling with journaling. These changes might sound small, but they created physical and psychological boundaries, a way of telling the brain, we're doing something different now. By changing the space, they changed the story of their lives. Time is just as important. Modern life teaches us to chase immediacy, to get results, answers, and pleasure instantly. Yet recovery demands patience. When I ask patients to spend a few minutes each day doing nothing, many become anxious or even angry. Sitting in stillness feels impossible at first, but that stillness is where awareness grows. In those moments, the brain learns to rest, to breathe, to stop demanding constant excitement. What begins as boredom often transforms into clarity. Then there is meaning, the most powerful antidote to addiction. Without meaning, even abstinence feels hollow. I've seen patients who gave up their addictions only to replace them with new ones, still searching for something to fill the void. True healing happens when people rediscover purpose, in relationships, in creativity, in serving others. One man, once consumed by opioids, began volunteering at a shelter for addicts. He told me, helping others gives me the same rush the drugs used to, but this time it doesn't destroy me. Meaning converts pain into purpose. It transforms suffering into connection. These three elements, space, time, and meaning, work together like a compass for the recovering mind. Space gives us boundaries, time gives us rhythm, and meaning gives us direction. Without them, pleasure collapses into chaos. With them, the brain finds balance again. In the end, this chapter isn't about avoiding pleasure, but rediscovering what it means to live intentionally. When we make room for quiet, when we slow down enough to feel time passing, we start to notice the small miracles of everyday life. The warmth of sunlight, the laughter of someone we love, the relief of being honest. That is where real happiness hides, not in the rush of dopamine, but in the gentle awareness that we are alive, connected, and capable of finding joy in the simplest moments. Chapter 6: A Broken Balance. As I looked around the modern world, I began to realize that the problem wasn't just individual addiction, it was collective imbalance. We are living in a time of abundance where pleasure is cheap and everywhere, yet meaning feels scarce. The human brain was never designed for such constant stimulation. We evolved to survive hunger, hardship, and uncertainty, but now we are drowning in excess. This overflow of dopamine has quietly rewired our nervous systems, leaving us restless, anxious, and perpetually unsatisfied. I saw this imbalance everywhere, in my patients, in society, and even in myself. There was Laura, a woman who seemed to have everything: a good job, a family, success, yet she was exhausted and miserable. She admitted she couldn't stop checking her emails, couldn't spend a minute without music or a podcast playing in the background. She wasn't addicted to any substance, but she was addicted to stimulation itself, to doing, achieving, consuming. When I suggested she take a weekend offline, she looked terrified. The thought of being alone with her own mind was unbearable. But when she finally did it, she came back changed. She told me, "I didn't realize how loud my life had become until it stopped." This, I believe, is the central tragedy of our time. We have confused pleasure with happiness. Pleasure is fleeting and one-sided. It demands repetition. Happiness, by contrast, requires balance, the dance between joy and discomfort, effort and rest. But the world today rewards only the highs. We glorify productivity, speed, and comfort while dismissing patience, restraint, and silence. The result is a society addicted to intensity, not because we are weak, but because we are human, and the environment we've built constantly pulls us toward more. From a biological standpoint, this imbalance leads to burnout and emotional numbness. When dopamine is overstimulated, the brain compensates by turning down its sensitivity. The more we consume, the less we feel. That's why people today can experience more and more and enjoy it less and less. Our endless search for pleasure leaves us detached from the very things that once made life meaningful: relationships, nature, creativity, stillness. But this imbalance isn't permanent. The brain can heal. The key is to reintroduce friction, to make room for challenge, for limits, for the possibility of not always feeling good. We restore balance not by chasing more pleasure, but by learning to tolerate its absence. When we stop feeding the constant hunger for stimulation, the nervous system recalibrates. Suddenly, the simplest moments, a quiet walk, a shared meal, an honest conversation, begin to feel rich again. In the end, a broken balance can be mended, but not through escape. It requires awareness, courage, and a willingness to feel both pleasure and pain. The goal isn't to eliminate desire, but to live in harmony with it, to let joy and discomfort coexist without either taking over. Because balance, in the truest sense, isn't a destination. It's a way of being, one that must be rebuilt again and again in a world that constantly tries to pull us off center. Chapter 7: Pressing on the Pain Side. For years, I believed the path to healing was about reducing pain, soothing, calming, protecting the mind from suffering. But the more I listened to my patients and studied the brain, the clearer it became. The way out is not avoidance, but exposure. To restore balance, we must sometimes lean into pain. That realization was both unsettling and liberating. We live in a world that sells comfort as salvation, yet comfort, when constant, makes us fragile. Our brains are built for challenge, for friction, for struggle. Without it, we lose resilience, meaning, and the ability to experience real joy. When a person voluntarily engages with pain through exercise, fasting, cold showers, honest self-reflection, or disciplined effort, something remarkable happens. The brain responds by releasing dopamine after the stress, not before. Unlike the quick, hollow pleasure of indulgence, this dopamine comes with depth and endurance. It's the high that follows effort, the quiet satisfaction that arrives only after discomfort. In scientific terms, this process is called hormesis, the body's way of growing stronger through controlled stress. But I like to think of it as the natural reward of courage. I once treated a man named David who had spent years dependent on painkillers after an injury. When the medication was taken away, he was overwhelmed by agony, both physical and emotional. I asked him to do something simple, to replace the chemical comfort of drugs with small, deliberate discomforts. He began walking each morning, then swimming in cold water, then meditating through the waves of craving. At first, he hated it, but over time, his pain transformed. He no longer feared it, he respected it. He told me one day, "I've learned that pain doesn't destroy me, it reminds me I'm alive." This idea, pressing on the pain side, goes against almost everything modern life teaches us. We are told that happiness means eliminating suffering, that technology and convenience can solve our deepest needs. But our constant search for ease has made us sick. When we remove all difficulty, we also remove the natural contrast that gives pleasure its meaning. Pain and pleasure are not enemies. They are partners in a larger system that keeps the mind balanced. I've seen it again and again. Patients who commit to facing discomfort, whether through honest emotional work, physical exertion, or spiritual practice, become calmer, more grounded, and paradoxically happier. By confronting pain instead of fleeing from it, they rewire their brains for resilience. In the end, the lesson is simple yet profound. Comfort alone cannot heal us. To truly live, we must be willing to hurt, just enough to wake up, to feel, to grow. Real pleasure is not the absence of pain, but the harmony that arises when we learn to embrace both sides of the scale. Only then do we find the steady, enduring joy that no addiction, no indulgence can ever offer. Chapter 8: Radical Honesty. Over the years, I've come to see that one of the most powerful medicines for addiction and emotional suffering is not found in a pill or a program, it's truth. Radical honesty, though uncomfortable, is the practice that reconnects us to ourselves and to others. It is the antidote to the quiet, corrosive lies we tell to survive, the ones that whisper, "You're fine," when you're not, or "No one needs to know." Every lie numbs us for a moment, giving a small hit of relief, but it also deepens our separation from reality. The more we hide, the more shame grows, and shame, in turn, fuels the very behaviors that keep us trapped. I remember Todd, a patient who had spent years hiding his drinking. He lied to his wife, to his coworkers, even to himself. When he first came to see me, he looked exhausted, not from the alcohol, but from the act of pretending. I asked him to try something new, to write down every lie he could remember telling and to tell one truth each day, no matter how small. He resisted at first, but as he began speaking honestly, admitting the empty bottles, the hidden nights, the fear, something in him softened. The moment he told the truth, the shame that once controlled him began to lose its grip. Honesty is painful because it forces us to face what we most want to avoid, our weakness, our hypocrisy, our vulnerability. But it is also deeply freeing. When we stop editing ourselves to fit an image, we make room for real connection. I've seen this in therapy sessions where people finally say out loud what they've carried for years: the affair, the addiction, the resentment, the loneliness. Once spoken, those secrets lose their power. What was once a private prison becomes an open space for healing. Even in my own life, I've learned how dishonesty can creep in quietly. As a doctor, I often felt pressure to appear strong, composed, and wise. But the more I played that role, the more disconnected I became from my patients. The day I began admitting my own doubts and struggles, our conversations changed. They trusted me not because I was perfect, but because I was human. That's the gift of radical honesty. It creates intimacy, the kind that can't exist in a world of performance. Our culture often celebrates transparency, but still rewards pretending. We curate our lives online, showing only the polished version of our pain. Yet beneath that illusion, we are lonelier than ever. Radical honesty is not about oversharing or confessions for confession's sake. It's about alignment. It's the courage to let who we are match what we say and do. In the end, the truth will always find its way to the surface. When we stop running from it, we stop needing to hide behind dopamine-driven distractions. Radical honesty doesn't just heal addiction, it restores integrity. And in that integrity, we rediscover something simple and profound: peace. The kind that comes not from being flawless, but from finally being real. Chapter 9. Pro-social shame. For a long time, I believed shame was purely destructive, something that crushed the spirit and pushed people deeper into hiding. But through years of listening to my patients, I began to see that shame has two faces. One isolates, corrodes, and breeds self-loathing. The other connects, humbles, and heals. I call this second kind pro-social shame, the kind that reminds us we belong to one another. When shared in honesty and compassion, shame becomes not a wound, but a bridge back to humanity. In my practice, I've watched countless patients carry unbearable secrets, convinced that if others truly knew them, they would be rejected. Many came to me drowning in private guilt, not only for what they had done, but for who they believed they were. Addiction thrives in that isolation. It feeds on silence and secrecy. The moment we hide our truth, we hand our pain over to shame's darkest form, the one that whispers, "You are alone, you are broken, you are unworthy." But when that shame is brought into the open, something extraordinary happens. The weight begins to lift. I remember a man in recovery who stood before his group and confessed that he had missed his daughter's recital because he was drunk. He could barely speak through the tears. The room fell silent, not with judgment, but with understanding. Another member placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I've been there." That moment changed everything. The man didn't feel smaller after confessing, he felt human again. His shame had turned outward, transformed from a wall into a window. Pro-social shame depends on community. It requires a space where people can fail without being exiled, where mistakes are met with accountability and empathy rather than ridicule. In such spaces, therapy rooms, recovery groups, even honest friendships, shame loses its poison and becomes a teacher. It shows us where we've strayed and calls us back to connection. I've seen it again and again. When people share their shame, they also rediscover compassion, not just for others, but for themselves. As a society, we've grown allergic to shame. We confuse it with humiliation and rush to numb it with distraction, scrolling, performing, pretending. But by avoiding shame altogether, we lose the moral compass it provides. Healthy shame tells us we've caused harm and urges us to make amends. Without it, empathy withers. Pro-social shame reminds us that belonging comes with responsibility, that freedom without conscience leads to disconnection. In the end, shame is not something to be eradicated, but to be redeemed. When we face it openly, it reconnects us with what is most human: humility, forgiveness, and love. The path to healing, from addiction, from isolation, from self-contempt, begins not with pride, but with the quiet courage to say, "This is who I am, and I still belong." That is the power of pro-social shame. It turns pain into purpose and transforms our deepest wounds into shared humanity.